the Hudson for Sports Illustrated. And in researching that article, he had come across an ancient navigational statute called the 1888 Rivers and Harbors Act. And that statute said that it was illegal to pollute any waterway in the United States. You had to pay a big penalty if you got caught, but also there was a bounty provision that said that anybody who turned in the polluter got to keep half the fine. And he had sent a copy of that law over to the libel lawyers at Time magazine, which owned Sports Illustrated. He said, "Is this still good law?" They sent him a memo back saying in 80 years it's never been enforced, but it's still on the books. And that evening, when all these men and women were talking about violence, he stood up in front of them with a copy of the law and a memo from the attorneys, and he said, "You know, we shouldn't be talking about breaking the law, we should be talking about enforcing it." And they resolved that evening that they were going to start a group that was then called the Hudson River Fishermen's Association, and later became Riverkeeper, and they were going to go and track down and prosecute every polluter on the Hudson. 18 months later, they shut down the Penn Central Pike. They got to keep $2,000, which was a huge amount of money in Croteville, New York in 1968. There were 2 weeks of wild celebration in the town. They used the money that was left over to go after Ciba-Geigy and Tuck Tape and Standard Brands, American Cyanogen, the biggest corporations in America, and they began winning all these cases and collecting money on everyone. In 1973, they collected the highest penalty in United States history against a corporate polluter. They got $200,000 from Anaconda Wire and Cable for dumping toxics at Hastings, New York. They used that money to construct a boat, which they called the Riverkeeper, which today patrols the Hudson, tracking down polluters. They used bounty money in 1983 to hire their first full-time riverkeeper, a former commercial fisherman named John Cronin. He used bounty money the following year to hire me as their first full-time attorney, and I had been working as a district attorney in Manhattan, doing criminal cases, but I'd always wanted to work on the environment, as Dean Bose said when she introduced me. And we began, when I was in law school, there was no environmental courses offered. It was 1981, and there was really no environmental law yet in the United States. So I went back to night school at Pace Law School, which is near the Hudson River, and specialized in environmental law. And I went back so that I could learn environmental law, so I could be a better advocate for my client. And I ended up getting a master's degree there, and they came and asked me 2 years later to teach a course. When I graduated, to teach a course or to run a clinic, a litigation clinic. And I said, I'll do it if the only client is the Riverkeeper. And I started the clinic there. I've been teaching it for 30 years. Now I have 2 professors to make. We have 10 who are allowed by a special court order to practice law under my supervision as if they were lawyers, so they can do anything a lawyer can do. We give each of our students 4 polluters to sue at the beginning of the semester. They file complaints, they do discovery, they do depositions, they go to court, they argue their cases. If they don't win the case, they don't pass the course. Since we started the clinic, we brought over 400 successful lawsuits against Hudson River polluters. We forced polluters on the Hudson to spend over $4.5 billion remediating the river. Today, as a result of our work, the Hudson River, which was a national joke in 1966, it was dead water for 20-mile stretches north of New York City, south of Albany, turned different colors every day depending on what color they were painting the trucks at the GM plant in Tarrytown. It caught fire. Today, it's the richest waterway in the North Atlantic. It's an international model for ecosystem protection. It produces more biomass per gallon, more pounds of fish per acre than any other waterway in the Atlantic Ocean north of the equator. And I'll throw in the Mediterranean, the Aegean, the Adriatic, the Black Sea, the Baltic Sea, the Marmara Sea, the Dardanelles, the Bosphorus, all the rivers that flow into all of those water bodies. There's only one left that still has strong spawning stocks of all of its historical species of migratory fish, and that's the Hudson. It's Noah's Ark, it's a species warehouse, it's the last refuge for many of these animals that are going extinct elsewhere, and the miraculous resurrection of the Hudson has inspired the creation of waterkeepers now all across the world. We have 200 waterkeepers, mainly in North America. We own the keeper name: Lake Keeper, Bay Keeper, Sound Keeper, Reef Keeper, Ocean Keeper, all of those different names we copyrighted. So when we license these new groups get started, they have to have a patrol boat, they have to have a full-time paid waterkeeper, and they have to be willing to go to war to save their waterway on behalf of their local communities. They're community-oriented, community-based, grassroots groups fighting for the community's rights to clean around 200 of them, and we are now spreading across the globe. We have 17 in Australia, 7 in China, we have I think 11 now in Russia, 7 in India, we have them all across Europe, we have 29 in Latin America, and we look forward to the day when every waterway around the country, around our country and around the world, has a waterkeeper who is protecting it, including I hope one day here in the Bahamas. I was out at Clifton yesterday, and the day before, on the water, I was diving on that reef, and I've been diving on that reef for many, many years, for decades, and that's the most famous, arguably the most famous reef in the world. There's so many, that South Reef on New Providence Island, because there's so many movies that have been filmed there. I think there's 3 or 4 James Bond films, Flipper, and Cocoon, and Spy Kids, and all these other movies that have been filmed on that reef, because there's these these giant forests of elkhorn coral. And when I went there years ago, the elkhorn coral was all alive. Like yesterday when I went out there wasn't a single living piece of elkhorn coral left out there. It's all dead, bleached. And a few hundred feet away, the energy plant for this island is Belgium, which is burning bunker sea oil, the most toxic oil. My brother's in the home heating oil business. He buys 1 billion gallons a year from Hugo Chavez and sells it in the United States, cutting lower costs to poor homes, to people who can't afford home heating oil. I know that industry, and I know that is the most poisonous oil. It's extremely carcinogenic when you burn it or when you spill it. And it is just, there's oil spill on that property that is spilling out of there like the Penn Central Pipe back in the 1960s. There's an evanescent sheen over top of that whole reef now, coming out of that oil plant. If you did that in the United States, we would put you in jail. But they're allowed to just do it because, as usual, there's always that connection. And if I were any of you, I'd go out there and look at that, and then write or call the government agency that is responsible for owning that plant. So why don't you put a boom out there that works? Why don't you clean up this oil site? Because they're killing that reef. And that reef, just Stewart Cove's operation, brings in 70,000 divers and snorkelers a year. It's $70 million to the southwestern part of this island. That's contributing, and at the same time, you've got an oil plant dumping oil onto the reef. They're killing the goose that laid the golden egg out there. To me, it's just criminal, and that, if I lived on this island, I would spend full time making them clean up that oil, because it is illegal what they're doing. And one of the things that connected all the water keepers was a couple of notions. One is the notion that we're not protecting the environment so much for the sake of the fishes and the birds. We're protecting it because we recognize that nature is the infrastructure of our communities. And that if we want to meet our obligation as a nation, as a civilization, as a generation, which is to provide our children with the same opportunities for dignity and enrichment and prosperity and good health as the communities our parents gave us, we've got to start by protecting our environmental infrastructure, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the wildlife, the fisheries, the public lands, the shared resource of our society.